Good morning. Welcome to Tip Off on Wednesday, February 1st. The onslaught for the Utah Jazz begins. Busy day today. Signing day happening right now, which is always fun for college sports fans. I'll give you some thoughts on that for a moment or two. Jazz, by the way, you can start your five pick 'em pack if you've embraced this team like you should. The Jazz are still selling the 5 game pick 'em pack where, hey, oh, I wish I bought season tickets or I can't quite afford season tickets or I'm into it now. A lot of the home games are done. But for example, you could take the Clipper game tonight, 8:30, the Laker game Saturday, Oklahoma City a week from Friday, grab Miami on March 2nd, and then pick your next one. Whether it's Denver on March 23rd, maybe just have people in town for a game. Dallas is April 16th, close the year, Portland. So pick your 5 games, and you get to go. Call the operators, 325-2999. I doubt they're there yet this morning, but by the time you listen to this, they may be. I hope you're well. Continually, thank you. I was in a meeting yesterday for the Locked On Jazz redesign. We've got a lot of big hopes. This is going to become my focus, where I put my attention, what I'm trying to build. I'm really committed to trying to build this to new heights. Really, no play-by-play announcer in the league has kind of built a portal or a site that becomes the primary source for the fans, and maybe we'll stretch that a little bit just because I've had the years of talk show background with you guys. But it's time for me to be a play-by-play announcer, and time for me to just commit to that and commit to that communication with you, and get rid of the other stuff and see if we can. Make that work. So I'll be doing the radio show with Scotty today, and then commit completely to this here at Locked On Jazz. And I appreciate you guys and all the support and ideas you've been giving us. We've got some exciting things. Big meeting yesterday, so we've kind of got a plan, an outline, and some of you, I think, might get involved in it. I think there's some really talented people out there that are Jazz fans, and there's ways to involve you. One other note on that, and I'll be quiet because I'm 2 minutes in already. Somebody had a great idea about Google Plus, and if anybody really understands Google Plus Hangout yet, I'm actually thinking that there can be a day where I announce a time, you guys come into it, and maybe I can record it and then turn it into a podcast. And so I basically take calls that way. Be kind of cool. We'll see if that'll work. All right. Let's get to the various things. 3 parts today. I want to talk about Jazz Clippers. I want to talk about signing day, and I want to talk about just the NBA last night because I watched a bunch of games. First off, on signing day, it's really remarkable how different Twitter has changed this thing. I mean, I just have everybody who's signing coming in right now every minute on my TweetDeck feed, which is pretty interesting. And it does engage you because I'm not a huge fan of signing day. I think it's the second most overrated day in sports compared to the NFL draft for the amount of interest it gets. However, I get that it engages the fan base again, and I can find myself as a Stanford fan with with David Shaw, second recruiting class, and wondering, oh my gosh, did we get the right guys? And oh my gosh, we got whatever. And I don't know anything about these guys, and they're all my favorite players already, no differently than you. Few things to watch today. Did Utah really get a different class? They're going to tell us they did. They're going to tell us that they got a Pac-12 class that's really different than they've ever had before. Did they? I think that's the first question. Obviously, watch any LDS athlete who Utah and BYU both won after. BYU has been winning most of those, not all of them, I got it, most of those battles in years past. Is that still the case? Is Pac-12 overriding that? Third thing to watch, positions. You got to look and see where the positions lay out because really you don't know anything about these players. You don't know who's going to. It's always a little bit of a surprise. John White was a nice pickup, but we didn't realize how good he was. Kyle Van Noy, we knew. I mean, some of them you know. But position breakdown is really important. Keith Gilbertson, longtime offensive line coach and head coach at various places in the NFL and in college, used to always tell me, look at the offensive and defensive line numbers together. That'll tell you. Look at the wide receiver and cornerback numbers together. But his big one is the lines. You can never end up short. He was a line coach, so that's his bias. But you can never end up short on the lines. And so keep an eye today on how many linemen come in. Particularly, Utah's losing a lot. BYU, frankly, is too. But you're always losing guys, and you have a natural attrition, and guys get hurt, and some guys can't play, and some guys can't handle getting hit. And so his theory was you had to have 9. Now that's a lot, but you got to have 9 linemen, offensive and defensive linemen combined in every class, because then you'll eventually have 5 or 6 of those who actually play, and you need to have, 5 or 6 playing every year. If you think about that, you really do. You got to have 3 seniors on your offensive line and 2 seniors on your defensive line every year if you're going to be good. And so I think his numbers actually match up. So keep an eye on that. And then I am curious to see what Gary Anderson can do at Utah State with everything going on. He's got a pipeline. And my concern for Utah and BYU, if this makes any sense, when Gary Anderson took over in this, there's your top tier guy. And those are the guys you're really going after, and they're being recruited by other people, and you don't always get those guys. And then there's your second tier guy who, you use to fill in. And my concern a little bit was always if Gary Anderson gets Utah State going, either that lower second tier guy or that third tier guy who's kind of the guy who fills in your gaps. Well, if he's suddenly gone to Utah State because you couldn't offer him a scholarship until you lost on somebody, and Gary sells him, now you've dropped pretty far. Now, for BYU, frankly, they only play a few games a year where that's an issue. That's not the case anymore for Utah. Utah just can't afford any longer to have the bottom of the class not be any good. Everyone's going to focus on the top of the class for Utah, and I get that that's important, but the bottom of the class may be more important for Utah than ever before playing in the Pac-12. All right, quick few notes about the NBA last night. Memphis-Denver game was really interesting. It was very similar in a lot of ways to the Jazz game the other night. It was grossly ugly early. Memphis, I think, is the model by which the Jazz are really following. Memphis can't shoot the 3, though last night they were 6 of 12, blind squirrel a little bit. They have Rudy Gay who can really score, and they have Zach Randolph who can really score. We don't have that guy, but they're pretty physical. They're pretty tough. They bang you. They have a major depth problem, though. The Darrell Arthur and Zach Randolph injuries, they really have a major depth problem. They're playing 8 guys barely, and Maurice Spates is not very good, and Pondexter is not very good, and keep an eye on Memphis whether they wear out. They broke a 4-game losing streak with a nice win last night, and then Denver's in control of this entire game, but they just have no idea who they're going to with the basketball late. And that really hurt them last night. And, they were up about 14 I think it was at one point in the fourth, or 12, and had the game. Even with 3 minutes left, they had the game. But they could not close it out. And I thought that was of interest. Paul George played very well for Indiana last night. In fact, he guarded Darren Williams a little bit. So that's a worth note. Brandon Knight, the youngster in Detroit, is having a very, very, very hard time care of the ball. He's almost getting close to a 1-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. I just got it. Ute Athletics. Welcome new Ute football players, Brian Allen and Havia Latui. And then it's pretty cool because they're then putting out a link to their bios. Really cool how they're using Twitter, actually. Lakers blowout, and then Jimmer didn't look good last night. Guarding Monte was tough. Isaiah Thomas outplayed him. Jimmer played just 19 minutes last night. He was 2 of 6, and had a little bit of a tough time. Monte didn't play very well last night. He only scored 12 points, and actually the Warriors showed some pretty good depth last night. Klay Thompson struggled again, 2 of 10, but he has begun to turn it on as with the 100 starts as a college player. And we've talked about this before, but if you look down as we hit the 20-game mark, we're about 33% through the year. If you look at the draft class of last year and you do a sort of win shares, which I think is a pretty decent way to kind of who's having an impact, they are almost all guys that played an awful lot. John Lure is 3, which is a surprise. He was the 40th pick of the draft, but he played 4 years at Wisconsin. Marshawn Brooks is 4. He played 4 years at Providence. Chandler Parsons is 5. He played 4 years at University of Florida. So all those guys are really making an impact. Markieff Morris played 3 years at Kansas. Josh Harrelson played 4 years. There's even a guy who's began to play a little here recently for For Philly, who's having some success, named Lavoy Allen, who I really don't know much about at all. He was a late second-round draft pick, but he's a 4-year Temple player. So those players that have played 4 years really seem to be having an impact at a far higher level than any other uh, players right now in the draft, which is really quite interesting to see. Brandon Knight has replaced Jimmer Fredette as the worst pick of the draft right now. Yes, and I had Brandon Knight awfully high. All right, from a Jazz standpoint today against the Clippers, fascinating game. These teams are almost identical right now. They have the same record. They have both played all their games at home. Both of them have only played 6 road games, which is the fewest of the NBA. Both of them are very good offensively and not good defensively. The Jazz are the 10th best offensive team. They're in the 20s defensively. Clippers are the 7th best offensive team. They're in the 20s defensively. And yet they're very different. The Jazz are going to play toughness. The Clippers are going to play, kind of in control. The Clippers have a huge advantage on the offensive end in 2 regards. They can shoot the three. Mo Williams is at 48%. And they have guys who can get shots off. And Caron Butler and Chris Paul can just create for other guys. And the Jazz really don't have that. Raja not playing tonight makes Caron Butler a tougher matchup. And I kind of doubt Al's going to be able to go tonight, but we will see in that regard. The Clippers to me are very intriguing in the sense that they just have never won on the road, and they have to learn how to do it. Frankly, the Jazz are going to probably struggle a little bit on the road. And we just haven't seen that yet. So I think that's what's most interesting to me in a lot of ways tonight. First question on tip-off from hashtag Locke tip-off. How do we handle CP3? What type of player bothers him? Player that bothers him is Darren, the big physical player. We don't have that guy, and maybe you could have slid Raja over. So I don't know how we're going to be able to handle Chris Paul. And what he does, he just keeps the dribble alive, and he keeps taxing the defense. And in a very different way, we're kind of forcing teams to play 24 seconds of defense to try to wear them out. And they're going to play 24 seconds of defense, make you play 24 seconds of defense just to make you make a mistake. They're not a running team. Both these teams are in the bottom half of pace of play tonight. James wants to know if we improve one position, what should it be? I mean, we got to get some outside shooting. You got to be able to spread the floor. But it's hard because right now we got 5 wings and we've got plenty, and you'd have to trade one of our guys for that guy. C.J. Miles is your trade bait. His contract ends at the end of the year, and you've got to find the team that is trying to clear cap space for free agency next year. And C.J. Miles is that guy, and better he plays, the better off for the Jazz. You also have to commit that CJ's not part of the future. From Alec Lamb, 14, how do I see the Jazz in 5 years? What Burks, Cantor, and Hayward role? I mean, they're the team. How good can Favors and Cantor realistically become? I'm not sure if either of them are going to become a superstar. I do think Cantor can become an offensive player. Honestly, he reminds me an awful lot of Boozer. Big body, moves guys around, doesn't have the lift, maybe get more lift, is going to have a nice outside jump shot, has to find a go-to move, but I mean, this kid's 19 and will stay 19 all season, and he works. Then he's a fabulous rebounder, which Boozer is, and will get some offensive points there. I really think there's a chance that what you have here is you can get 16 or 17 a night from Cantor. You can get 14 to 15 a night from Favors just from his time on the floor. Hayward gets you, 11, 12, 13 on the night. And just the question is going to be if any of them, and Burks probably is more of a scorer, if any of them can become your go-to guy or can become, that guy. And I don't know if any of them can become the superstar. So I think you're going to have very high-level players at every position and then see. But there's so few guys. I mean, Kevin Love really can't get his shot off. Paul, we're seeing, has a hard time with that late in games. Blake can't really get a shot off late. Put up big numbers, but there's just so few guys you can really go to in this league. That's what makes Darren and Boozer and Carl and John that we've had so fabulous. And I think that's the step. I'm not convinced any of these guys can take that step along the way, but boy, I do think they're all going to be pretty good. There's nothing that has me concerned about any of them. Gordon has had the most time, so I think we're seeing more of his warts. A lot of his warts are just he's hard on himself and he's got to continue to develop and figure out a shot and do things. And he's just not played a great deal. Uh, All-Star Weekend is my Super Bowl. What are the chances of seeing our young guys in the rookie sophomore game? I don't know if we'll get anybody in the rookie. Only 7 guys go. Gordon might just from time on the floor. Cantor should. I don't know if any of our guys will make that game. I would kind of be surprised. And I don't think Paul's going to make the All-Star game either. It's just, everybody's always playing like an All-Star. Yeah, a lot of guys are. And, Darren didn't make the All-Star game very often. This one from longtime Jazz fan. When you see Derek Favors, does anything remind you of Karl Malone? Well, 2 things. I feel like, and I don't know how old longtime Jazz fan is because he's a longtime fan, so he might be really old. The issue that I think is hard here is we never saw Karl at this age. Favors is 20. By the time we saw Karl, he was 22 and 4 years out of La Tech. So I don't have any idea. And then the other thing that I think is really hard is if you think about this, and I think you got to remember this about Jazz fans. I'll leave you this note. I actually think this might be a very, very important note if I can leave you with anything today. If you think about Jazz fans, in 2012, if they're 30 years old, Jazz fans 30 years old, and you go back to when they were, really knew Stockton and Malone and all those guys. That is, 15 years ago was when they were in the NBA Finals. So the 30-year-old was only 15. And so I'm not sure you really have a great basketball memory on who they were, even if you're a 30-year-old, right? Well, more so, those guys were 36 and 37 at that point. So they were 10 years in the league. So now that guy was 5 when they first entered in. So truly, unless you're 50, I mean, because I'm 40, and Stockton and Malone are my favorites, and I covered them, but I don't really remember them when they were young. I really don't. I think it would be, I really think it would be wrong for me to tell you I remember Stockton playing behind Ricky Green, but I wasn't old enough to really have a great vibe on. I think I was 12 or 13 years old. I didn't have a great vibe on understanding the game and what they're really like and what their intricacies were and where they were, struggling and things like that, because I was 14 years old when Stockton entered the league. So to some extent, unless you're 50 years old, I don't think you really understand or know who Stockton and Malone really were the whole time. And even then, you got to figure out whether you're really that big a fan at 24 years old. So that is somewhat of a misnomer when we try to compare guys and we remember Stockton and Malone, because what most of us remember, 40 years old in that area, is the final run. But those guys are 13 and 14 years into their career by then. All right, that's Tip Off. Send your questions to Lock Tip Off. Talk to you soon.